Woman is unjustly fired and moves into an abandoned house, but upon entering the basement. The sun had barely risen over the worn-out neighborhood where Emily's childhood unfolded. Cracked sidewalks and peeling paint on old houses were the backdrop to her early years. Yet amidst the decay, her mother, Clara, managed to infuse their modest home with love and hope. Clara was a single mother, a fighter who worked long hours at a laundromat to provide for Emily. Her dream was simple yet profound, to give her daughter a better life than the one she had known. Emily admired her mother deeply. She would often sit by the window, watching Clara walk home after long shifts, her shoulders sagging under the weight of the day. On one such evening, Clara brought home a second-hand book about astronomy. "I want you to dream big, Emily," she said, her voice weary but resolute. "The stars are your limit." Those words planted a seed of ambition in Emily's heart. She wanted to reach for the stars, to escape the cycle of poverty that had gripped her family for generations. But life, as she would learn, was rarely that forgiving. Clara's health began to decline when Emily was just 15. What started as fatigue turned into something much worse, a diagnosis of late-stage cancer. Emily became her mother's caretaker, balancing school with hospital visits and household chores. The burden was heavy, but she carried it with a fierce determination. In her final days, Clara held Emily's hand and whispered, "Promise me, no matter what, you'll fight. Don't let this world break you." Emily promised, though tears blurred her vision. When Clara passed away, Emily felt as though the ground had been pulled from under her. Alone and unprepared for adulthood, she dropped out of school to work odd jobs, her dreams of the stars now a distant memory. Years later, Emily met Brandon. He was charming and ambitious, with a magnetic personality that drew her in. Brandon spoke of big plans and wealth, painting pictures of a luxurious life they could build together. For the first time in years, Emily allowed herself to believe in something more. Their relationship was intense, filled with passion and shared dreams. But cracks began to show when Emily discovered she was pregnant. Brandon's reaction was far from what she expected. "This is going to ruin everything," he said, pacing their small apartment. "You should consider the other options." Emily's chest tightened. "Other options? This is our baby, Brandon." "It's not the right time," he argued. "I have too much on the line." Emily refused to entertain the thought of an abortion. She wanted the baby, even if it meant raising it alone. Brandon's obsession with wealth soon outweighed his commitment to their relationship. One day, he packed his bags and left, choosing to pursue a wealthy woman who could offer him the lifestyle he craved. Pregnant and abandoned, Emily faced her darkest days. She moved into a cramped studio apartment and took up work at a diner to make ends meet. Every night she whispered to the child growing inside her, promising that they would have a future, no matter how hard she had to fight for it. When Ethan was born, Emily's resolve hardened. Holding her son for the first time, she knew she couldn't fail him. She would endure anything to give him a life free from the struggles she had known. The world had taken much from her, but it wouldn't take away her hope. As Emily rocked Ethan to sleep one night, she gazed out the window at the same stars her mother had pointed to years ago. They seemed further away now, but still, they shone. A faint smile touched her lips. "I'll fight," she whispered into the quiet room. "I'll keep fighting." This was the promise she would carry into every challenge ahead. Emily's days had become a ceaseless blur of exhaustion and determination. Every morning she woke before dawn to prepare a bottle for Ethan, her infant son, and pack him into his stroller for the short walk to the neighbor's apartment. Mrs. Harris, a kind, elderly woman, watched Ethan while Emily worked. Despite her own financial struggles, Mrs. Harris only accepted a modest sum, Recognizing Emily's desperate situation, Emily had managed to secure a job as a dishwasher at Le Bon Appétit, an upscale restaurant downtown. The contrast between the glamorous dining room and the cramped, steamy kitchen where she toiled was stark. The hum of conversation and clinking glasses in the restaurant above seemed worlds away from the relentless grind below. Her workday was grueling. By the end of each shift, her hands were raw and pruned from hours in hot, soapy water, and her back ached from standing for so long. She faced more than just physical exhaustion. The staff dynamics were hostile, particularly Charlotte, the restaurant owner's wife, who seemed to harbor an inexplicable vendetta against Emily. Charlotte's sharp heels clicked ominously on the tiled floors whenever she entered the kitchen, her eyes narrowing at Emily as though searching for a flaw to exploit. It wasn't long before she found one. "Emily!" Charlotte's voice sliced through the noise of clattering dishes. "You're moving too slow. This isn't a charity. We have standards here." Emily swallowed the sting of the words and muttered, "Yes, ma'am," continuing her work with renewed focus. She had no choice but to endure the humiliation. Ethan depended on her. Her colleagues offered little solace. Most of them avoided her, too wary of crossing Charlotte to offer friendship. The few who did speak to Emily did so with a mixture of pity and condescension, reinforcing her feelings of isolation. The kitchen was a battlefield, and Emily was constantly on the defensive. Despite the challenges, she poured herself into the work, arriving early and leaving late. Each paycheck, no matter how meager, was a lifeline for her and Ethan. She scrimped and saved, skipping meals to ensure Ethan always had enough formula. Her resolve remained unshaken. She was determined to provide for her son. One evening, after an unusually busy shift, Emily was approached by Charles, the restaurant's owner. Unlike his wife, Charles had always treated Emily with distant politeness, but tonight there was something different in his demeanor. "You've been working hard," he said, his voice gruff, but not unkind. "I noticed. Keep it up." It was a small gesture, but it buoyed Emily's spirits. For a moment she felt seen, even valued. However, the brief reprieve was shattered the following week when disaster struck. Charlotte had accused Emily of stealing from the restaurant's cash drawer. The allegation came out of nowhere, blindsiding Emily during the middle of a shift. "Stealing?" Emily's voice shook with disbelief as Charlotte stood before her, flanked by the restaurant's security manager. "Yes," Charlotte said, her tone icy. "We've had discrepancies in the register, and all signs point to you. I can't have someone like you tarnishing our reputation." Emily's protests fell on deaf ears. The staff, many of whom had witnessed Charlotte's disdain for Emily, kept their heads down, unwilling to intervene. Even Charles remained silent, avoiding her pleading gaze. "I didn't take anything," Emily insisted, her voice cracking. "You have to believe me." But the decision had already been made. Emily was fired on the spot, escorted out of the restaurant as though she were a criminal. Humiliation and rage burned in her chest as she walked away, clutching the meager contents of her locker in a plastic bag. That night, as she held Ethan in her arms, Emily allowed herself to cry for the first time in months. She whispered to him through her tears, "I won't give up, baby. I promise. No matter what, I'll find a way." Her resolve remained intact, though her path forward seemed shrouded in uncertainty. What she didn't know was that her life was about to take a turn, one that would forever change the course of her story. The rain fell steadily, soaking Emily as she trudged down the narrow sidewalk with Ethan bundled tightly against her chest. The weight of his tiny body was both a comfort and a reminder of her responsibilities. It had been weeks since her dismissal from the restaurant, and despite relentless job hunting, she had yet to find another position. The little savings she had was nearly gone, and she was running out of options. Her mailbox was crammed with overdue bills and notices, each one a reminder of the precariousness of her situation. On this particular day, however, a letter caught her eye. The envelope was thicker than usual, its paper cream-colored and embossed with an unfamiliar insignia. With trembling hands, she opened it. The words inside didn't make sense at first. "Dear Miss Emily Harper, it is with regret we inform you of the passing of Mr. Carlos Alvarez, your maternal grandfather. As per his last will and testament, you have been named the sole beneficiary of his estate." Emily stared at the letter, the rain forgotten, as its meaning slowly dawned on her. She read further, learning that the estate in question was a house located in a rural town several hours away. Her first reaction was confusion. Her mother had never spoken of a father, much less a grandfather. Clara had always described their family as just the two of them, but curiosity soon replaced doubt. Emily found herself clutching the letter as if it were a lifeline. A house, a fresh start. It sounded too good to be true, yet she had nothing to lose. The following week, Emily and Ethan embarked on a journey to see the house. She packed what little they owned into a borrowed car, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and fear. The town was small and unassuming, the kind of place where everyone seemed to know each other. When she finally pulled into the driveway of the house, her breath caught. The property was modest but charming, set on a sprawling lot edged with trees. The house itself was weathered, its white paint peeling and the roof slightly sagging, but Emily could see its potential. To her, it wasn't just a house, it was a chance at stability. Ethan cooed softly in her arms as she stepped through the front door. The interior was dusty, the furniture covered in sheets, but there was an undeniable warmth to the place. She wandered through the rooms, imagining how she could make it their home. Her heart felt lighter than it had in years. In one of the bedrooms, she found a box of old photographs. Most were faded, depicting a stern-looking man she assumed was Carlos. There were also pictures of Clara as a child, smiling in ways Emily had never seen. It was like discovering a piece of her mother she hadn't known existed. As Emily explored further, she noticed signs of recent habitation: empty food cans in the kitchen, a mug in the sink. Unease crept over her, but she dismissed it as nerves. After all, the house had been vacant for months, and perhaps the executor of the estate had left things behind. It wasn't until late that night, after Ethan had fallen asleep, that Emily began to hear noises, the creak of floorboards, the faint sound of movement coming from the basement. Her body tensed, and she grabbed the nearest object, a heavy candlestick, as she approached the basement door. The air grew colder as she descended the stairs, the faint glow of her flashlight illuminating the concrete walls. At the bottom, her heart nearly stopped. A man was slumped in the corner, bound and bruised, his clothes tattered and his face pale. Emily gasped, and the man's head snapped up. His eyes, filled with fear and desperation, met hers. "Help me," he croaked, his voice barely audible. For a moment, Emily froze, 1,000 questions flooding her mind. Who was this man? Why was he here? And more importantly, what had she just walked into? This discovery would mark the beginning of a series of events that would transform Emily's life. But in that moment, as she stood in the damp basement, clutching her son upstairs and her fear in her chest, she had no way of knowing the path that lay ahead. Emily's heart pounded as she stared at the man huddled in the corner of the basement. His wrists and ankles were bound with coarse rope, and dark bruises marred his face. His clothes were torn, his shirt stained with blood and grime. The basement air was damp and cold, the faint smell of mildew mixing with the sharp metallic tang of dried blood. She tightened her grip on the candlestick, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Who are you? What are you doing here?" The man coughed weakly before looking up, his voice barely audible. "Please, help me." Emily hesitated. Every instinct screamed for her to run upstairs, grab Ethan and call the police, but something about the man's desperate, pleading eyes rooted her in place. He didn't look like a threat. He looked like a victim. She edged closer, keeping a cautious distance. "What happened to you?" They kidnapped me," he rasped. "I've been here for weeks. Please, I'm not going to hurt you. Just untie me." Emily's mind raced. If what he said was true, then someone had been using her grandfather's house for something sinister. But who and why? She glanced toward the stairs, half expecting to hear footsteps of his captors returning. "Hold on," she said, her voice firmer now. "I'll get something to cut those ropes." She hurried upstairs, grabbing a pair of scissors from a kitchen drawer. Before returning to the basement, she checked on Ethan, who was still sound asleep in his crib. She lingered by his side for a moment, summoning the courage to face whatever awaited her below. When she returned, the man hadn't moved. She approached cautiously, kneeling just out of his reach as she began cutting through the ropes. The man winced as the tight bindings fell away, revealing raw, chafed skin beneath. He slumped forward, gasping in relief, but too weak to move much further. "What's your name?" Emily asked. "Vincent," he murmured. "Vincent Hale." The name didn't ring a bell, but there was something about him, his sharp features and confident posture, even in his weakened state, that suggested he wasn't just an ordinary man. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had seen his face before, though she couldn't place where. "Why were you here?" she pressed. Vincent shook his head, his voice hoarse. "It's a long story. I don't even know how they found me. All I know is that they wanted money. Lots of it. They kept me alive, probably waiting for a ransom." Emily frowned. "Who are they? Did you see their faces?" He hesitated, his brow furrowing. "No, they always wore masks. I don't know if they're coming back." Her blood ran cold at the thought. She looked around the basement, half expecting shadows to materialize in the corners. "We need to get you out of here. Can you walk?" Vincent tried to push himself up, but collapsed with a sharp cry of pain. His leg was badly injured, swollen and discolored. "Not far," he admitted. Emily made a quick decision. She wrapped his arm around her shoulder and with great effort helped him to his feet. He leaned heavily on her as they made their way upstairs, each step slow and labored. By the time they reached the living room, Emily was sweating and out of breath, but Vincent was safely seated on the worn couch. She grabbed a blanket and draped it over him. "Stay here. I'll get you some water." As she moved to the kitchen, her thoughts churned. Should she call the police? What if whoever had done this came back? But another thought stopped her. If this house had been used for something illegal, involving the authorities might drag her and Ethan into dangerous waters. For now, she decided to keep things quiet until she learned more. Vincent drank greedily from the glass she handed him, his hands trembling. "Thank you," he said, his voice steadier now. "I owe you my life." Emily sat down across from him, exhaustion seeping into her bones. "Don't thank me yet. We're not safe here." He nodded, his jaw tightening. "I understand, but I'll protect you. I promise." His words caught her off guard. She barely knew him, yet there was something about his tone, firm, resolute, that made her want to believe him. For now, Vincent was a mystery, but Emily sensed he was someone who would change her life in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. The night stretched on, and Emily found herself glancing repeatedly at the windows, listening for any unusual sounds. Despite the fear, she felt a strange sense of purpose. For years, she had been fighting to survive, but now, for the first time, it felt like she was fighting for something greater than herself. Vincent, too weak to talk further, drifted into an uneasy sleep on the couch. Emily watched him for a moment, then turned her attention to Ethan, who remained blissfully unaware of the chaos unfolding around them. As she stood over her son's crib, she made a silent vow. Whoever had done this to Vincent, and whoever had used her grandfather's house for such darkness, would not take away this fragile new chance at a better life. She would protect Ethan, no matter what it took. The storm outside began to ease, but Emily knew the real storm was only just beginning. The morning sun filtered through the curtains, casting soft light over the living room where Vincent lay on the couch. His chest rose and fell steadily, his body finally succumbing to the deep sleep of exhaustion. Emily stood nearby, cradling a steaming mug of coffee as she observed him. In the daylight, he looked even more fragile, though his angular features hinted at a life of confidence and purpose before whatever nightmare had brought him to her basement. Ethan babbled softly from his playpen, snapping Emily from her thoughts. She walked over to her son, kissing his forehead and whispering reassurances that everything was fine. She hoped they were. Vincent stirred, groaning as he shifted on the couch. His eyes fluttered open, squinting against the light. He winced as he tried to sit up, and Emily quickly moved to his side, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Take it easy," she said. "You're still recovering." He gave a weak smile. "Good morning to you, too." Despite the small exchange, tension hung heavy in the air. Emily's questions from the night before remained unanswered. Who was Vincent? And why had someone gone to such lengths to imprison him? More importantly, had his captors really abandoned their plans, or could they return at any moment? "Are you hungry?" she asked, deciding to ease into the conversation. "Starving," Vincent admitted. "But I think my leg hurts more than my stomach." Emily glanced down at his swollen leg. She had done her best to clean his wounds the night before, but without proper medical supplies, there was only so much she could do. "I'll make some breakfast, and then see what I can do about that." As Vincent ate, he opened up, his voice measured and deliberate. "I should start by saying, I'm not just some random guy. I worked as a CEO for Hale Industries. My family has been in business for decades. We specialize in energy solutions." Emily blinked. That explained the sense of familiarity she'd felt. She remembered seeing the name Hale in the news, attached to stories about innovation and philanthropy. "And you think someone targeted you because of that?" Vincent nodded. "It's more than just money, though that was part of it. Hale Industries has been working on a project, a renewable energy initiative that would undercut some major players in the oil industry. A few months ago, I started getting threats. Anonymous emails, strange phone calls. I thought I could handle it." He paused, his jaw tightening. "But they got to me. Clearly." Emily leaned forward, absorbing his words. "And they brought you here, to my grandfather's house." "That's the strange part," Vincent said, his brow furrowing. "I don't know why they chose this place. I didn't even know it existed." Neither had Emily until recently. "I only found out about this house a few weeks ago," she admitted. "It was left to me in my grandfather's will. I don't know much about him. My mom never talked about her family." Vincent looked thoughtful, but his exhaustion was evident. He leaned back on the couch, his hand absently rubbing his temple. "Whoever they are, they left me here thinking I wouldn't be found. Maybe they thought this house was forgotten." Emily crossed her arms, her mind racing. "Do you think they'll come back?" Vincent's eyes darkened. "It's possible, but if they do, they won't find me defenseless this time." Later that afternoon, Emily ventured into town to gather supplies. She needed proper first aid materials to treat Vincent's leg, and she also wanted to buy a lock for the basement door. As she pushed Ethan's stroller through the small general store, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The shopkeeper's friendly chatter did little to calm her nerves, and she was relieved when she finally returned home. Vincent was waiting for her, sitting upright for the first time. He looked stronger, though his face was still pale. "Thank you," he said when she handed him the first aid kit. "For everything. You didn't have to do this." Emily shrugged, brushing off his gratitude. You were in my basement. What was I supposed to do? Leave you there? Most people would have called the cops. I'm not most people, she said, her tone firm. And besides, something tells me this is bigger than just a kidnapping. Vincent hesitated before nodding. It is, but for now, let's focus on staying safe. Over the next few days, a fragile sense of routine settled over the household. Vincent recovered slowly, helping where he could despite his injuries. He played with Ethan, earning the baby's trust with his warm smile and gentle manner. Emily found herself watching them, surprised at how easily Vincent fit into their lives. But the unease lingered. Emily began to notice subtle signs that someone might be watching the house. A parked car that didn't belong, unfamiliar footprints near the edge of the property. She didn't tell Vincent, not wanting to alarm him, but she made a mental note to stay vigilant. One evening, as they sat together after putting Ethan to bed, Vincent broke the silence. You don't have to keep me here, you know. This isn't your fight. Emily looked at him, her expression resolute. You were left here, in my house. That makes it my fight. For the first time since she'd met him, Vincent smiled fully. It was a tired smile, but it carried a weight of gratitude and something else, something deeper. You're a rare kind of person, Emily. She didn't respond, but as the evening wore on, she felt the beginnings of a bond forming between them. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. For now, that was enough. The following week passed in cautious calm, though a storm brewed just beneath the surface. Emily and Vincent had settled into an uneasy rhythm. She cared for Ethan and kept the house running, while Vincent gradually regained his strength, his sharp mind already working on strategies to protect them should danger return. Yet the underlying questions about their situation gnawed at both of them. Emily had started venturing into town more often, partly to gather supplies and partly to gather information. Small towns had a way of holding secrets, and she hoped someone might know something about the house's history or her grandfather, Carlos Alvarez. On one such outing, she bumped into a familiar face, Charles, the owner of Le Bon Appétit. Emily froze in the grocery store aisle, her heart pounding. He looked as surprised to see her as she was to see him. Emily, he said, his voice tinged with regret. I've been looking for you. She stiffened, clutching the basket in her hands. Why, haven't you done enough? Charles sighed, his expression troubled. I know I wronged you, and I've been carrying that guilt. But that's not why I'm here. Emily didn't respond, her guard firmly in place. She couldn't imagine what he could possibly want from her now. Charles took a deep breath before continuing. I've learned something that involves you, he said carefully. It's about your family. Emily's stomach twisted. The last thing she wanted was to reopen old wounds, but curiosity got the better of her. What are you talking about? Not here, Charles said, glancing around the store. Meet me at the diner on Main Street. We need to talk. Later that afternoon, Emily sat across from Charles in a booth at the small diner. The clatter of plates and the hum of conversation around them felt distant as she waited for him to speak. Charles seemed uneasy, stirring his coffee absently. I don't know how to start this, he admitted, but I'll get straight to the point. Emily, I'm your father. The words hit her like a physical blow. She stared at him, her mind struggling to process what he'd said. What? She managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Charles nodded, his expression filled with both shame and hope. Your mother, Clara, and I, we were young. We loved each other, but life pulled us apart. I didn't even know you existed until recently. Emily's heart raced as memories of her mother flooded her mind. Clara had never mentioned a father, had never even hinted at his existence. The idea that Charles, her former boss, the man who had fired her unjustly, could be her father was too much to comprehend. You're lying, she said, her voice trembling. Why would you come here now after everything? Charles leaned forward, his eyes earnest. "I didn't know, Emily. I swear to you. I only found out after you left the restaurant. I started looking into your background, trying to understand why your name felt familiar. Then I found old records and your mother's letters." Emily shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. "No, my mother would have told me." "She wanted to," Charles said softly. "But when she reached out to me, I didn't respond. I was selfish, caught up in my own life. By the time I realized what I'd done, it was too late. She was gone." Anger flared in Emily's chest, mixing with the pain and confusion. "You had your chance, and you abandoned her, and now you think you can show up and play the hero?" Charles looked down, his face lined with regret. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just want a chance to be part of your life, and Ethan's." Emily's breath hitched at the mention of her son. She had spent her entire life without a father, and now this man was asking to fill that role, not just for her, but for Ethan too. It felt impossible to reconcile the man she had known with the father he claimed to be. "I need time," she said finally, her voice cold but firm. "I don't know if I can believe you, or if I even want to." Charles nodded, his expression somber. "I understand, but if you ever need me, I'm here, always." Emily returned home in a daze, her emotions swirling. Vincent noticed her distress immediately and approached her as she stood in the doorway, still clutching her keys. "Emily, what's wrong?" he asked gently. She hesitated, then blurted out, "Charles, my old boss, he says he's my father." Vincent's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "That's unexpected." "I don't know what to think," Emily admitted, her voice cracking. "Part of me wants to believe him, but another part hates him for everything he's done. How do I even start to process this?" Vincent placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to decide anything right now. Take the time you need. But whatever you choose, you're not alone in this." His words brought a small measure of comfort, and Emily managed a weak smile. She glanced over at Ethan, who was playing on the floor with his blocks, blissfully unaware of the chaos surrounding him. "I just want what's best for him," she said softly. "I don't want him to grow up feeling abandoned, like I did." Vincent nodded. "And you're already doing everything you can to make sure that doesn't happen." As night fell, Emily sat by the window, staring out at the darkened yard. The weight of the day's revelations pressed heavily on her, but Vincent's presence nearby reminded her that she wasn't facing this alone. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to hope that the broken pieces of her life might someday fit together again. The warm morning sun streamed through the kitchen window, bathing the house in light and making it feel more alive than it had in years. Emily stood at the stove, flipping pancakes, while Ethan sat in his high chair, giggling as Vincent played peekaboo with him. For a moment, everything felt right, as though the pieces of her chaotic life had finally begun to fall into place. Over the past weeks, Emily had faced her share of revelations, heartbreaks, and choices, yet she had made it through, stronger and more determined than ever to create a stable, loving home for Ethan. The house that once seemed like a mystery had become a sanctuary. Charles had kept his word. Though Emily remained guarded, she allowed him into her life gradually. He visited regularly, bringing gifts for Ethan and stories about Clara, stories Emily had never heard. She still struggled with anger toward him, but she couldn't deny the sincerity of his efforts to make amends. One afternoon, Charles arrived with a weathered photo album. He handed it to Emily, his hands trembling slightly. "Your mother kept these," he said. "She never stopped thinking of you or me." Emily opened the album and found photos of her mother as a young woman, smiling with a joy Emily had rarely seen. In several of the pictures, Clara stood with Charles, their arms wrapped around each other, their faces full of youthful hope. It was strange, almost surreal to see her parents together, but it filled a small void she hadn't realized existed. "Thank you," Emily said quietly, "for showing me this." Charles nodded, his voice soft. "I just want you to know that I'll always be here for you and Ethan." Meanwhile, Vincent's recovery had gone well. His leg had healed enough for him to move around with ease, and his strength had returned. With every passing day, Emily felt her bond with him deepen. He had become more than just a guest in her home. He was her partner in every sense of the word. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the stars, Vincent broke the comfortable silence. "Emily," he began, his voice steady but laced with emotion, "I don't know how to say this, but you've saved me, in more ways than one." Emily turned to him, her heart pounding. "I came here broken, terrified, and unsure if I'd survive. But you gave me more than just a chance to heal. You gave me a reason to keep going," he continued, his eyes locking with hers. "I love you, Emily, and I love Ethan. I want to be here for you both, if you'll have me." Tears welled in Emily's eyes as she leaned closer to him. "You don't even have to ask," she whispered. "You're already part of our family." In that moment, the barriers Emily had built around her heart crumbled. She kissed Vincent, a kiss filled with gratitude, love, and hope for the future. Their happiness was tested one last time when Brandon reappeared. He showed up unannounced one morning, looking disheveled and regretful. Emily froze when she saw him standing on the porch, his eyes scanning the house before settling on her. "Emily," he said, his voice heavy with remorse, "I made a mistake. I walked away from you and Ethan, and it was the worst decision of my life. I want to make things right." Emily stared at him, her emotions a whirlwind of anger, pity, and closure. She stepped outside, closing the door behind her to keep Ethan and Vincent from hearing. "You don't get to waltz back into our lives after everything you've done," she said firmly. "Ethan deserves better than a father who left before he even met him." Brandon looked down, shame evident on his face. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but please—" "No," Emily interrupted, her voice unwavering. "We're not your backup plan. I've built a life for Ethan, and he has everything he needs. You lost your chance." Brandon lingered for a moment before nodding. "I understand," he said quietly. "Goodbye, Emily." As he walked away, Emily felt a weight lift from her chest. She closed the door and turned back to her family, knowing she had made the right choice. In the months that followed, the house became a true home. Emily used the sewing machine Vincent had gifted her to start a small business making custom clothing, and her work quickly gained popularity in the town. Vincent, too, began to rebuild his life, using his business acumen to consult remotely while staying close to Emily and Ethan. Charles became a constant presence, not just as a grandfather to Ethan, but as a supportive figure in Emily's life. Though their relationship was far from perfect, it was real and built on the shared desire to move forward. One sunny afternoon, Vincent stood in the yard, holding Ethan in his arms as Emily joined them. She looked at the two of them and felt a swell of love and contentment. "Thank you," she said to Vincent, her voice soft but steady. "For what?" he asked, smiling. "For being here, for loving us." Vincent kissed her forehead. "It's where I'm meant to be." Together, they walked back into the house, a house that had once been a symbol of the unknown, but now stood as a testament to resilience, love, and new beginnings. Emily had faced loss, hardship, and betrayal, but she had emerged stronger. She had found love in unexpected places and rebuilt the family she had always longed for. And as she watched Ethan grow, surrounded by the love and stability she had fought so hard to provide, she knew she had finally found peace. I hope you enjoyed today's story. If you did, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought about the story. See you in the next video.